Hello, I'm Reverend Scott Wipperman, pastor here at First Presbyterian Church in Helena, Montana, and we welcome you to our worship service today. I'd like you to know that regardless of who you are or where you are in your journey of faith, you're welcome here at First Presbyterian Church.
Lazarus was sick. He stayed where he was 2 more days.
Then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and you are going back there?" And Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? A man who walks by the day will not stumble, for he sees by the world's light. It is when he walks by night that he stumbles, for he has no light." And after he said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going to go there to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So they told him plainly, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there, so you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, called Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us go, so that we may die with him."
On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will, even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she told him. "I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who was to come into the world."
"Where have you laid him?" Jesus asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. And Jesus wept. Then they said of Jesus, "See how he loved them." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across its entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been dead for 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God?"
So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. The word of the Lord.
Waking the dead is a very difficult thing to do, as relayed in this most ancient of texts, The Princess Bride. Now, I don't know if you've seen this movie or not. If you haven't, you need to go and see it, okay? I'll rent it. It's a wonderful movie. But, let me get back. The Princess Bride, we have 2 main characters, Wesley, who is there, and his love, Buttercup. They are in deep love, but Wesley is poor, and Buttercup is but a commoner. And so Wesley goes off to win his fortune and be able to marry his bride. But as word comes back that his ship, when he was traveling, was besieged by the dread pirate Roberts, and everyone knows that anyone gets caught by that pirate dies. There are no survivors. And then the prince on the left here, Prince Humperdinck, he proposes to this commoner to become his bride, to become the princess. But this is not quite as good as it seems, because he has another plan. He has a plan for Princess Buttercup to be captured, kidnapped, and killed, and so he can blame it all on a neighboring kingdom so that he can then go start a war with them. Well, Wesley does come back and tries to rescue his love, Buttercup. And Count Ruger, the man on the right there, who is the sidekick to Prince Humperdinck, captures him and takes him to his dungeon of torture, where he has invented this machine that sucks the years out of somebody. And he hooks Wesley up to this, and Wesley seems to be resistant at the beginning, so he throws the machine to the max, sucking all the life out of Wesley. And then Wesley's two companions, Inigo Montoya and Physig, the giant, rescue him and take his body to Miracle Max. Miracle Max used to be the kingdom's magician, but he was fired by Prince Humperdinck, put into disgrace, and now lives just in squalor. And he and his wife there are looking at the body of Wesley, and they say, "So what's so important for this young man to live? Why don't you ask him?" And Inigo says, "We can't ask him, he's dead." And he says, "No, he's just mostly dead. That's different than all dead. Because if you've seen the movie, you all know that mostly dead is slightly alive." And so they urge Miracle Max to bring a portion about to bring Wesley back to life. And they say, "Please do this quickly, because we need to go quickly save Princess Buttercup before she falls into this trap." And Miracle Max says, "Don't rush me, Sonny. You rush a miracle man and you get rotten miracles." And I won't tell you the end of the story, but I will say that it does end with justice. And like I said, if you haven't seen this, you must go rent it and see it. It's a wonderful story within a story. So raising and waking the dead back to life is difficult. And maybe we can't do it too quickly. As Miracle Max said, you rush a miracle and you get rotten miracles, right? So is this why Jesus waited 2 days before he went to go see Lazarus, preparing for this miracle that he was about ready to do? Because when Jesus gets there, Lazarus has been dead for 4 days. And Jesus says that this is to show God's glory. Now, when we talk about glory, normally we think about glorifying, about praising someone, raising our voices to someone. But in the book of John, when he talks about glory, this is about God's revelation of God's self. God's glory is God revealing himself to us and to all those who are around. And that is what Jesus is speaking about here. So the stone is rolled away. And Jesus calls to Lazarus. "Come forth," he says. And a man wrapped in funeral cloths walks out of the tomb. And I have this funny feeling that this was the easy part. Because there were more there that day that needed to be wakened from the dead. And that may have actually been a little bit harder than what was just done. You see, the disciples there were misunderstanding. Jesus says in the text that Lazarus has fallen asleep and that I'm going to go wake him up. And they think he's just sleeping. And they say, "Let the sick man sleep. It's good for his health." But then Jesus has to remind them, tell them, clarify to them that no, he's dead. But death is not going to have the end of this sickness. And I'm going to do this so that you may believe. He's talking to his disciples that have been with him for years, listening to him. But he says, I have to do this so that you will believe. Do the disciples have a believing problem? And then he gets, after journeying for days, gets to Bethany. And when he's outside the village, word comes that he's arrived, and Martha runs out of the house to go see him. And Martha pleads with him, if you had been here, my brother would have not died. And this is not a complaint, this is not an anguish, this is a statement of belief, of fact, that she knows that Jesus, who made the lame walk, could have saved her brother. But then she goes on to say that I know that God will give you whatever you ask. And maybe she believes this, and maybe she doesn't. I know she believes the first part, that Jesus could have saved him. But now that he's been dead for 4 days, is it that she believes that God will give Jesus whatever Jesus asks for? Or is it just that she can't quite conceive of what it is that Jesus might ask God to do? Do her beliefs need to be awakened? And so Jesus says to Martha, while she is in earshot of the disciples, I'm sure, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live, even though he dies. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? He asked Martha. Do we think she did? And then the text tells us that Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem. And Bible commentators have said that we believe that Lazarus was probably a rather wealthy man from a rather well-to-do family. So he probably had friends and connections. And so it is said that many people from Jerusalem came to the house to mourn. Now, it was a practice in this time that you not only had your friends come mourn, but to make things look good, because granted, funerals took a lot longer back then, just like weddings took a lot longer back then. You know, when you had a wedding, it lasted for 3 days, not just an afternoon. And mourning lasted for a long time, so you would hire professional mourners. These people were great at coming and weeping and crying and mourning over whoever it is deceased, whether they knew that person or not. I don't know if there was a American certified or an Israel certified mourner association or something, but they would get these mourners to come there. But the people came and they mourned and they were standing there. And Jesus prays before the tomb when they have all come out of the house. They all can hear this. He says, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. Jesus isn't bragging here. He isn't trying to promote himself, that he has a better connection to God than other people. Jesus is saying this in front of these people to help wake them. He's saying this as an invitation to the very intimacy that he holds with God. He's inviting all of these people here to that same intimacy with God, to that same relationship. And he goes on to say, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? In other words, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see God's self-declaration right here in front of you? And a man, 4 days dead, walks out of that tomb. Jesus' call to Lazarus in the tomb was also a call to the disciples. It was also a call to Mary and to Martha, who were there with him. It was also a call to all those that had come to mourn, that were there standing around listening. And it was a call to those who were not even there. Come forth. Come out of that tomb. And immediately after this text, we learn that some didn't hear that call. Some that were present went to the Pharisees and proclaimed what Jesus had done. They said Jesus had done this amazing thing, that he raised Lazarus from the dead. And those Pharisees went to the high priests and to the Sanhedrin, and they gathered together, and they said that we have to stop this man, because if he keeps going, all will come to believe in him. And they began to plot his death and his demise. They didn't listen to Jesus' invitation. They listened to their own fear. So here they are, gathering together. Here is a man performing many miraculous signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him. He must die. But others heard the call. Others heard the invitation. Others heard this statement that Jesus said, calling Lazarus out of the tomb, but calling them too. Calling them, that their vision may be expanded beyond the limitations of what they think, that their imagination, that their belief might be widened. And Jesus calls the man forth, and he comes from the tomb, and all the people see God's glory, see God's witness, God's revelation of God's self. Now back then, Jesus waited 2 days before heading off to Bethany. And it is clear from his prayer that Jesus had already prayed to God about raising Lazarus from the tomb long before he ever got there to do that. So as Miracle Max said, Jesus wasn't rushing this miracle. And now it's been 2,000 years. And Jesus isn't rushing another miracle. A miracle that he's already to do here and now. A miracle of calling forth to Lazarus, but into all of us, to come out of that tomb. To come out of the tomb, that dark, tiny tomb that we've been in. Come out, wake up, come into the light. Come into the light and let your imagination expand beyond what you can do in that tomb, but what can be in God's will. Come into the light and let your faith blossom and bloom and grow beyond what that tomb can contain, to believe the wonders that God can do for each and every one of us. Come into the light. Jesus is calling to Lazarus and to each one of us. Come. Come out of that tomb. Wake up from your mostly dead and come into full life. Come out of your tomb and live the life I have for you.